Okay. Thanks very much. Whoop, there it is. Okay. Early in the school year, it must be this time of year when you have me come in and do an overview of our performance on state assessments each year, which is an annual report that the board receives right around this time. And what we try to do during this presentation is give the board an overview of how our students performed on the state assessments in the prior year and what that has meant for our accountability status. Accountability is the process that the state goes through each year, and that gets reported to the community and to the public as part of the report cards, which would be the following. Evaluating student performance is a federal requirement in addition to a state requirement. It's a federal requirement as part of No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top laws. As I noted, it's also a state requirement and also part of commissioner's regulations. We evaluate student performance in English language arts as part of the 3 through 8 state assessments and also the English regions. We evaluate in math as part, again, as the 3 through 8 assessments, and the integrated algebra regions, which will soon, is right now in the process of moving to what's called the Common Core algebra regions. That was the first regions to move from its current state to what's called the CC, or the Common Core layout. There's also science evaluations that occur in grades 4 and 8, and also could also be the earth science regions if the students take that in grade 8 instead of the actual 8th grade state test for science. And if you are a secondary building, you will also have evaluations to look at regarding your graduation rate. And the performance that your students have on these types of evaluations have a bearing on district accountability and each individual school's accountability. That is not new. That's been in place since approximately 99-2000. But since last year, it has also had a bearing on teacher accountability and principal accountability as part of APPR, which is a whole different presentation, which we're not going to get into tonight. Performance is measured 2 different ways. The first of which is achievement on these state assessments, kind of like as a snapshot. Face value, what you see is what you have. Where at one particular point in time, this particular year, 13-14, the state is going to look at how your students performed on that one assessment and how many of those students were considered to be proficient, which is achieving levels 3 or 4. New within the last few years is also the concept of growth, where the state is looking not only at how your students perform this year, they're looking at how your students are performing if we track their growth from one year to the next in relation to students that the state would consider to be similar to them. And then we track that along. I'll share that a little bit more as we go. When you're looking at performance of your students, the state, in addition to looking at all of your students as a group, either by the district or by individual schools, it also disaggregates your students into groups of students by their ethnicity, by their economical status, by if they are limited English proficient students, or if they're a student with a disability. So that's basically what you have as far as the types of evaluations and accountability. So if we dive right into the 3 through 8 assessments, we'll start with math. Just to give you an overview of what you're looking at here, this is a line chart that shows 5 years of data on the grades 3 through 8 math assessments, beginning in the year 2010 all the way to the left, and then working all the way to the current year of 2014. This looks at every student in our district or the county or the state and how they performed on their particular math assessment in grades 3 through 8. When you look at 2012 and to 2013, you can see that drop. That's when, whoa, what did I just do? That was cool. Okay, there we go. When you look at, from 2012 to 2013, that drop, that's when the state assessment has changed. You remember we had that conversation 2 years ago, obviously, where the state changed their protocols for the 3 through 8 assessments, and everybody did that. But what you're looking at, the green bar on top is Massapequa's performance, the red bar in the middle is the county, and the blue bar on the bottom is the state. And this is the performance, this is the percentage of students that achieve levels 3 and 4. So as you can see, we're kind of in tandem with each other with Massapequa having better performance in the county and the state, and that gap that you see between the lines stays consistent as you move throughout the years. And as you can see in the most recent year of 2014, that gap still remains between Massapequa, the county, and the state as well. So we've kind of kept pace as we've gone along. If we go to look at that on a grade level by grade level basis, just on Massapequa students alone, a sort of bar chart. This is each grade level. It's grade 3 on the left, grade 8 all the way to the right. The blue bars represent performance in 2013, and the red bars represent performance in 2014. You see that across the board, our students are performing better this year than they did last year on those state assessments. Again, this is one snapshot data, so you're not looking at the same students. You're looking at a different group of students each year, but performance is increasing. The reason I have a big red X over the grade 8 math is because this year the state allowed grade 8 students that were involved in accelerated coursework that led towards the algebra regencies. They allowed students that were slated to take those regencies to have that regent score count towards their accountability, and was not requiring them to also take the math regents. This is the first year that they did that. So it used to be that students had to take both, the grade 8 math and the algebra regents at the end of the year. Since this year that was not necessary, a requirement, if I just look at the grade 8 math alone, I'm going to get skewed data. Because one year it's everybody, the next year it's half the students. And so that's why I got a big red X over it, because you're looking at really apples and oranges data. So you got to kind of take that as a grain of salt with math. So our math data we were pleased with. We saw that we kept pace with the rest of the county, with the rest of the state. We had growth going as each grade level, as you can see, moving forward. ELA was a little bit different of a story. It's the same kind of data, and it's over, again, a 5-year period. And you see that dip between the 2012 and 2013 school years, which we talked about. But what was concerning to us is obviously what you see here. And what's clear is that we are no longer keeping pace in ELA with the county or the state. We dropped. Now, why that's going to happen? Well, that's a longer conversation for another day to determine why we think that might have occurred, but that is a concern for us. If we look at, again, the same kind of a thing as far as bar charts go, across the board, our students did not perform as well this year as they did last year on the 3 through 8 ELA assessments. And again, that's going to be part and parcel of different conversations and analyses of why we think that might have occurred. When we go towards and look at the Regents exams, and I know this is small, so I'll try to give you an overview. You have an analysis here of each of the Regencies that our students participated in, going down the rows here. The English Regents on the top, and then you've got the Math Regencies and the Science and the Social Studies. And that green and yellow section identifies the percentages of our students that achieved a level 3 or 4 in Regents, and the state identifies if you are 85 and above, that's a 4. If you're between 65 and 85, that's a 3. 55 and 65 is a 2, and below 55 is a 1. The column to the right of the colored column represents the Regents' performance. And if our performance was better than the Regents' performance, you'll see green in our column. Light green for a little bit better, and dark green for a lot better, more than 10 percentage points. Yellow represents just a little bit worse, within 5 to 10 percentage points, and then it would be red if it was more than 10%. So you can see that if we weren't keeping pace with the county, we were beating the county on the percentage of our students that performed well on Regencies. And that's that data. So everything up until this point, what I've shown you, has been snapshot data, one moment in time, how our students performed on one particular test. What this chart is showing, and again, I apologize for it being small. I'll circle stuff for you. This is going into the detail of that growth component that I was referring to. What the state is looking at is, it looks at the way our students performed in the prior year, groups them with similar students, and then tracks those students' performance from one year to the next. And when it does that, and in relation to those students, when it does that, it's able to identify what's called the student growth percentile for that child, and then coagulates that all together from the state to give us what's called a mean growth percentile. When you look at this piece on the top here, obviously this column right here is talking about what the state's median is for ELA, math, and then combined. And obviously, if the state's looking at every student in the state, the median is going to be 50. So that's obvious. If you go down to Massapequa and we look at those same data points, for ELA, the percentage of our students that are above the state median is 33. And for math, it's 47. So what that says is that our students are not keeping pace from a growth standpoint with the rest of the state. We're not growing at the same rate that the median of the state is growing at. That's what this chart is basically telling you. Now, again, that's a point of concern. Why is that? So that's another piece of analysis that we will look to delve into in the next not too distant future. Hold on a second. Just got to get rid of this. Now, how does all that bear on to the point of accountability? Whoops. Did I miss a page? I did miss a page. There we go. Accountability determinations. Now, APs, we were going to hold off on. I apologize for that. That's another conversation. So how does that bear on to accountability now? By looking at the performance of your students, both as a snapshot and as a growth component, what the state is going to ask is, did you meet your accountability targets for the 2013-14 school year? That's making AYP. Did you make adequate yearly progress? And if you did not, then the state's going to identify if you are possibly a focus, priority, or local assistance plan school. Neither of those is a good thing. Focus and priority means you're in the bottom 5 to 10% of all schools statewide. Local assistance plan means that you've missed your accountability targets for more than 2 years in a row, either on performance or participation, and are going to be needing to put a plan in place on how you're going to remedy that. Okay? If you do meet your accountability targets, then the state's going to identify, well, did you meet them in such a large degree to also be identified as a reward school? There's two different kinds of reward schools. You can be a high-performing reward school by hitting these 5 to 6 points. Did you make AYP for the last 3 years? Did you increase the largest performance gap between one of your disaggregated groups? I mean, all your disaggregated groups. Were you in the top 20% statewide, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You could also be a reward school for being high progress. The difference there is, did you decrease the performance gap between groups, meaning that you're progressing well? And that's another component for reward school. So even though we have concerns about how quickly our students, if our students are keeping pace with growth, and also concern on how our students perform DLA, when you look at our accountability determinations for the current year, which is based on last year's data, you'll see that we are in good standing for all 9 of our schools, plus the district as a whole, and 6 of our 9 buildings were identified as reward schools, and you can see that data here. Something to keep in mind that Ames campus, unfortunately, could never be identified as a reward school because Ames does not have state assessments that can be tied directly to it as a building. So it kind of becomes a little bit of an orphan. I'm sorry, Ames. But that's that one piece there. All right.
If I can just jump in
Please do.
quickly. With the reward school, you are looking at old data. You are not looking, it does not correspond to the current state assessment data that Mr. Schilling just projected. Okay. The reward school, go back to that slide one.
Yep.
the reward school, that 6 of our 9 buildings
Right.
actually did receive that distinction, is based
It's based on 12-13 year,
12,
that's right.
2012-13 data.
Right.
Not last year's data.
Right.
Correct.
Right.
Not what you are reviewing.
State gets a little convoluted with that. It gets kind of very complex to keep track of, unfortunately.
I see that Birch Lane is not a reward. I thought Birch Lane was a reward school.
At one point it was,
They were
and
very
now it is
highly
not.
rated.
Next year it could be again. It takes it snapshots at a time. It just looks at that criteria, those 6 criteria that you saw there, and then it's just going to go down the road year by year, looking at the analysis of how the students in that building performed. Did it meet these criteria or did it not?
Were they a reward school the previous year?
Yes.
I believe they were, right?
I
Yeah, and I
remember
don't
reading an
believe-
article on that in the paper.
And I don't believe McKenna was last year, and now they are.
Ames
And
can never
also,
be.
right, and with Umpqua.
Right. I don't recall if Umpqua was last year or not.
Can you check on that?
Sure, absolutely. All right. So, it's a little shorter than my last presentation, I think. Right? So, I'm going to stop right there. Very concise, black and white. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
I guess my only question is, when will the board be receiving information that will address some of the things you've talked about today?
Yeah, go for it.
Well, what we are currently doing is analyzing in an upcoming board meeting, at an upcoming board meeting, definitely before the end of the year, we will have a complete analysis. I have some opinions right now, but we will have that, and also programs that we will be looking to implement. This is very discouraging news. I think we were quite respectable in the area of mathematics, but in English language arts, we did not fall in pace with all the other districts. And that is extremely concerning. We had, last year was a very challenging year, as we all know. With the full implementation of the Common Core. Our teachers worked diligently. But what we discovered as we moved along, as the board knows, is that with the modules, we adopted and we didn't adapt. So that when we realized that, we did make changes, and teachers came together and worked to revise curriculum. Are we in a better place as we stepped off to this school year? Absolutely. But it is extreme, very, very disheartening. So we will continue to look at this. Our opt-out rate is quite high, as the board is aware. We've been looking at the number of our high-performing students from the 12-13 year, and seeing how many of those children did not take the test because they refused. And there are, I guess, of the 3s and 4s combined, about 36% of our highest performing students, did not. So it's just a heck of a lot of things, Mrs. Fisher, that went into this. It's very, very complex. This is a very controversial time in education, and I respect everyone's opinion and position, but we have to look at this and take this quite seriously.
Thank you.
I have a question on so based upon the scores that we have, that you just went over, so we are not eligible to be a reward school? based, like the reward school status was based on 2012.
I haven't analyzed the performance for the 2014 school year against the state's criteria to determine where the buildings will be for the upcoming year. It's a very, very convoluted. What you have those 6 points up here. This is the Reader's Digest view. If I showed you the actual formulas that they go through, it's not something that I believe I have the time or expertise to actually go through myself. I kind of have to wait for the state to do it for us, which would be next spring.
What we can say is that none of our schools made the 95% participation rate last year. None of them did that. So, did they make AYP, Mr. Schilling?
Well, that's a great point, and I didn't even think about that, but unless something changes or unless I miss something, because none of our buildings met the participation requirement of 95%, in theory, none of our buildings would be reward schools next year.
Yeah, that's what I
Okay,
thought.
that's what it is. Yeah, our participation rates fluctuated between as low as 84 and as high of 93%.
Correct. Of our schools, the participation rate was actually Birch Lane and Berner were the 2 schools that were the lowest in participation.
Right, 84%.
84%.
84%.
Correct. With
And I think it was Fairfield had 93, right?
Fairfield was our
Yeah, on
highest.
the ELA.
Yeah, 93%. So none of our schools will make AYP.
Right.
Has the state talked about what that's going to mean in financial dollars to us? State aid?
No, I haven't heard anything personally from the state on if they're planning on making any revisions to their rules for AYP based on participation rates. And what that means financially, that's a whole other kind of a conversation. It's really more of a, aside from the financial aspect, which is not really, it's more of a, once you're identified as a district in need of improvement and having to put together a local assistance plan,
Right.
the work that needs to be occurring at the building level with the state education department to establish, put together, promulgate a local assistance plan at a building level is immense. We did it with
We did it
McKenna
with
about 3 years
McKenna.
ago.
Yes.
It is a massive project.
It is.
And to have to do that for a participation rate is going to be interesting.
The
So
amount
that's
of
what we're gonna be-
resources
yeah.
that needed to be put into that for a year-long project was tremendous.
But we could be putting that together in each school.
We could be putting that
Absolutely.
together. Yes, we
If-
can.
With the processes that the state has laid out as it stands right now, if we miss our AYPs in the 2015, if this current school year, so now you're 2 years in a row, if things are the way they are right now, in theory, we would be in need of improvement in all of our elementary schools and Berner, which would mean that we would need to put together local assistance plans on how we're going to remedy that. Now, if will the state change that? Who knows? This refusal movement that had occurred this past spring is not, we're not immune to it, and the state, we're not the only ones that were affected. So the state right now has been very mum. They haven't said much of anything. We'll see what happens.
But this also affects all the residents in the community, because with property values, and that's why I was just reading, about 2 years ago, I was reading in like Zillow, and I was reading in all the real estate papers, and that's what stuck to me. I didn't mean to single out just Birch Lane, but Birch Lane was like very, very high in, high-performing school. And, people were looking, I have friends that are real estate agents, and they said that, of course, they can't steer people towards districts, but they ask, what districts are good, and they want to see test scores, and they want to see that. So this affects everybody with our property values, and everything within the community. Because I was just reading, was it Manhasset that made the Blue Ribbon School with
I don't even know who, they must have announced.
I didn't hear
think it was in the
either.
paper today. I think it was Manhasset.
Right, yes.
And then
And-
several
At Blue Ribbon, they had a very small opt-out rate with their students, and they were talking about the participation rate and how they scored so high, within the testing.
But then again, Mrs. Ryan, you had Rockville Center, who, I mean, the district is the epicenter of the test refusal movement. Almost half of their students test refused, and they scored quite high.
Right.
I think that, what concerns me the most, and please, I want the public to understand that I respect every person's opinion here and position, okay? Is that what is happening here in Massapequa, I feel, is that the whole integrity of testing in general is being compromised. I have already received many test refusal letters from parents, and of course they're going to be honored. But along with that, what parents are including in their letters are things like NWEA. And you know that we have been using that tool for approximately 5 years. It started as a pilot, Birchland School. And the purpose of it was really to differentiate learning for students, to know where the student was, what was the target that the student was working toward. And what is happening now is that parents are saying, I do not want my child to participate in that exam. Okay? That is, we use that as a benchmark 3 times a year. What that does is it puts us as a district at a disadvantage. Yes, is a teacher a wonderful assessor? Does a teacher have that internal barometer? Of course, we're professional educators. However, no teacher can tell you, okay, in this area of reading, in this particular skill, okay, the child is scoring here, and here is the target. We're going to try to reach that target. What's happening is that all of the tools, the diagnostic tools that we utilize and utilize beautifully here, parents don't want their children to, many of them don't want their children to participate in the NWEA. And it does, it changes the atmosphere because kids are saying, well, is this an important one or not? Okay? And the truth of the matter is, and many parents call me and ask, well, Mrs. Iconis, how can you judge what you have a 3rd grader that takes a state exam? How can that predict what happens on the regions? Well, we all know that the regions are going to become Common Core, right? We know that. They're changing in their format, in their design, and in their content. What I feel that we're doing, okay, with our youngsters is we're not giving them that practice time. And that might be for other reasons. And as I said, I respect those other reasons because parents may feel it's tied to teacher performance levels. And I get it. I understand where there's excessive testing. And you know what? I'm with you. I think there is too much testing. Okay? But what's happening here, what I see happening in Massapequa, that's extremely troubling to me, is that the atmosphere surrounding testing is just changing. And children are not taking it seriously. And for those that come into the testing setting who really try, it's, well, my friends aren't. Yeah. So it has changed. It most definitely. I have seen a huge change. And that's what I can say. Is that the only reason? Absolutely not. Of course not. It's one factor. Just one factor. A lot of it is the transition to the Common Core. But the standards are there. We all need to reach those standards. The way we get there, we're trying to adjust with the modules. We need to, we must incorporate those tried and true traditions. God bless you. We must. We must give teachers latitude. We must. They are the professional educators. But we also, all of us, need to align ourselves to those standards and move toward them, because that's where the children are going to be judged down the line. And everybody's got to pass them in order to graduate. That's the bottom line. So that's it, but we're really going to take a look at this very, very closely. And we're going to recommend to the board, we already have some things in the work on the elementary level, what we would like to, put into place, because this is very troubling. This is not Massapee Park. If you look at the graph of where we land, it's pretty sad. We were always up there on the left side of the graph. We were one of the 10, and I liked being one of the 10. I don't like where we landed. And that's it.
And it's really very troubling to think of the local assistance plan and what that will do to our resources within the school and our finances.
If Dr. Larry was in the audience, the principal of McKenna, we went through that with her, Mrs. Castelli and I, with Dr. Lowry. That was one heck of a year. One heck of a year. It involved teachers, it involved administrators, it was form upon form, parents. It just was a very, very arduous process. We were there, we did it.
Well, this is really a priority that the state education department and the governor really has to look at very carefully, and the impact that this will have on all of the schools, not just to
They
implement
most
this.
definitely
They
need
have
do
to,
this.
and this
State
has to be a
education
very hard
departments.
lobby towards them on this.
They most definitely do, because they're putting the districts, all districts, in a really rough spot.
Right, make a point. Okay. Are there any other questions on the board members? Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much.
That brings us to number 7. That brings us to number 7, the resolution